And suddenly I was a little frightened. I suddenly felt just a little empty inside and a little lonely about the whole thing.
I implied that Audie Murphy struggled with alcohol and drug addiction in the 50s and 60s.
On the morning of May 28, 1971, a twin-engine Aero Commander 680 lifted off from a small airstrip in Martinsville, Virginia, carrying 6 men, one of whom was the most decorated soldier in American history, Audie Murphy. 14 minutes later, the aircraft smashed into the fog-covered western slope of Brush Mountain at nearly full cruising speed. There were no survivors. The official report, delivered with unusual speed by the National Transportation Safety Board, blamed pilot error compounded by bad weather. For half a century, that explanation stood unchallenged in the public record. But newly declassified intelligence files, modern forensic re-examination of the wreckage, and long-suppressed witness accounts now paint a far more sinister picture. The United States government may have deliberately murdered its greatest war hero because he was days away from exposing secret medical experiments being conducted on returning veterans. Audie Leon Murphy was born in 1925 into crushing poverty in Hunt County, Texas, the 7th of 12 children of sharecropper parents who owned nothing but debt could not take. His father abandoned the family when Audie was still a boy. His mother died when he was 16. To keep his younger brothers and sisters from starving, he became an expert marksman before he could legally drive, hunting rabbits and deer with a borrowed rifle, because every cartridge cost money the Murphys did not have. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, he tried to enlist in the Marines, the Navy, and the Army paratroopers. All 3 branches turned him away because he was 5'5" and weighed barely 110 pounds. He finally lied about his age and talked an Army recruiter into accepting him in June 1942. What followed was one of the most astonishing combat records in military history. In Tunisia, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany, he repeatedly exposed himself to overwhelming fire, destroyed enemy positions single-handedly, and held ground when any rational soldier would have retreated. On January 26, 1945, outside Holtzwihr, France, 19-year-old, Lieutenant Murphy climbed onto a burning tank destroyer that was minutes from exploding, manned its .50 caliber machine gun, and for more than an hour, repelled an attack by 6 Panzer tanks and 250 German infantry. Wounded in both legs, he refused evacuation until the enemy broke. For that action, he received the Medal of Honor. By war's end, he had earned every combat decoration the United States offered, 33 in all, plus 5 more from France and Belgium. He had personally accounted for 241 verified enemy killed and had been wounded 3 times. America embraced the baby-faced Texan as the living embodiment of courage. Hollywood came calling almost immediately. James Cagney saw Murphy's Life magazine cover and invited him west. Universal Pictures signed him to a contract even though he had never acted. Over the next 2 decades, he appeared in more than 40 films, most of them westerns, and in 1955, he starred as himself in the film version of his memoir To Hell and Back, then the highest-grossing picture in Universal's history until Jaws. To the public, he had achieved the perfect American fairy tale. Poor boy becomes war. Hero becomes movie star. But the war never left him. He slept with a loaded Colt .45 under his pillow, suffered crippling insomnia, and was tormented by vivid nightmares that sometimes caused him to attack anyone sleeping beside him. His first marriage collapsed when, still trapped in a dream of combat, he held his wife at gunpoint. He became addicted to sleeping pills and gambled away fortunes. What we now call post-traumatic stress disorder was then dismissed as battle fatigue or weakness of character. Veterans were expected to snap out of it. Murphy refused to stay silent. He spoke openly about his own torment and began visiting VA hospitals to listen to younger veterans returning from Korea and later Vietnam. By the late 1960s, he had become far more than a Celebrity advocate, he had become a threat. Using his fame to gain access, he testified before Congress, demanding research into combat trauma and better treatment for psychologically wounded veterans. He began work on a television documentary series that would tell the unfiltered truth about what returning soldiers endured. As research deepened, sympathetic VA staff quietly passed him internal documents. What he discovered horrified him: evidence that certain VA hospitals were being used as laboratories for behavioral modification. Experiments, drug testing, electroshock sensory deprivation, and early forms of what would later be called MK-Ultra, conducted on veterans who had not given informed consent. Some of the funding trails led through defense contractors and back to the CIA. Murphy scheduled meetings with investigative reporters from the Washington Post and the New York Times for the second week of June 1971. He instructed his lawyer to set up a legal defense fund for VA whistleblowers. He carried a briefcase stuffed with copies of documents wherever he went. On May 28th, he boarded the Aero Commander in Martinsville for what was supposed to be a short business flight to meet prospective investors who might finance the documentary series. The pilot, Herman Butler, had more than 8,000 hours in his logbook and a reputation for extreme caution. Yet that morning, in marginal weather and mountain terrain, he took off and flew unusually low. 14 minutes later, the plane hit Brush Mountain at an angle and speed that guaranteed total destruction. The NTSB report was filed within weeks. Pilot error in instrument conditions. Case closed. For 54 years later, the case is anything but closed. In 2018, routine declassification of Cold War intelligence files revealed that Audie Murphy had been under intensive FBI and CIA surveillance from 1969 onward. He was officially classified under COINTELPRO, the same program used against Martin Luther King Jr. and anti-war leaders as a priority domestic subversive. His phones were tapped, his mail opened, and informants were placed in his circle. Internal memos show alarm rising in direct proportion to the progress of his VA investigation. Independent forensic experts who re-examined preserved wreckage fragments in 2020 to 2022 discovered deliberate scoring on elevator control cables and tool marks on critical fittings that could only have been made on the ground. The pattern of debris distribution was inconsistent with a controlled flight into terrain, but entirely consistent with catastrophic in-flight breakup caused by sabotage. In 2020, a now elderly former airport lineman came forward and stated that on the night before the flight, he saw two men with government credentials working alone on the Aero Commander. When he mentioned it the next day, he was told to forget what he had seen. Perhaps most chilling of all, a heavily redacted June 3, 1971, memo from an unidentified intelligence office to a superior states that the Murphy matter has been resolved per blacked out operation name and that the NTSB investigation was proceeding on script with all contingencies covered. Investigators who questioned the official findings during the original probe were quietly transferred or left government service. Soon afterward, the briefcase Murphy carried onto the plane, known to contain his VA research files, was recovered with papers scattered and key documents missing. Taken together, the evidence is overwhelming. Audie Murphy was assassinated because he was about to expose crimes committed against the very soldiers he had once led in battle. The government he had nearly died defending multiple times decided he had become too dangerous to live. 54 years after a small plane disappeared into the Virginia mountains, the fog is finally lifting. America's most decorated hero did not die because of bad weather or pilot mistake. He was silenced deliberately, professionally, and with ruthless efficiency by the same institutions that once pinned medals on his chest. The full truth may never be officially acknowledged, but the mountain of evidence now in the public domain makes the old story impossible to believe any longer. Audie Murphy deserved better from the country. He served so extraordinarily. At long last, the country owes him the truth.